check out the videos.
All right.
Serving the kids in the park. Wednesday is an amazing opportunity to hang out with kids, serve them a free lunch, play frisbee or football, and show the love of Christ just by being there. Join us every Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. at Lincoln Park as we go out to impact our community.
Hi, I'm Joe Giac. Who wants some sushi? I'm looking for some people to go on a road trip. October 6th to 17th, we're going to take a team of up to 10 people to Tokyo, Japan to help out Fuse Jesus Community and the work they're doing over there. Fuse Jesus Community is a youth-focused church looking to reach Japan for Christ. They're looking to change the face of Japan by showing Jesus to Japanese young people one person at a time, and they're committed to one-on-one discipleship. If you want to be part of a movement that's changing Japan and see a place you've never seen before, come to my informational meeting right after this service or right after the 11 o'clock service next Sunday in the chapel, where we'll talk specifically about what we'll do, who we'll be working with, and what it's going to take for you to be a part of this. This is only 10 days out of your life, but it's 10 days that can change it. So join me on a trip to Japan. Let's change the world together.
All right. So you guys made it. Didn't get blown away on your way here? In case any of you were coming in on a kite or a sailboat, or you hang glided. Not quite sure how you say that one, but you all made it. Windy out there. So I want to start tonight out with the prophetic word. And this comes from a conversation that I was having with a friend of mine on my front lawn on Monday night. And here's the prophetic word. It has to do with the end of the world. I know. Yeah, you're all interested. We're one of those churches. Yep. Has to do with the end of the world. And so far, I've been 100% accurate. The Lord's given me this word through the Ecclesiastes series. And so here it is. 2 events are certain. You will be born, and you're going to die. That is the end of the world as far as any of us should be concerned. We were sitting on the front lawn, me and my buddy who doesn't go to church, and we were talking about 2012 and I was like, the conversation was prefaced, what are you guys going to do with the last year and a half of your life? Got some big plans, and we talked about this whole infatuation that our culture has had since about the 60s. Where we're really, everything that happens, every world event, every world leader that's raised up, we freak out and we start to talk about the end of the world. And it's funny, we're not the only culture to do that. Cultures have been doing that all around the world forever. I'm not sure if the Mayans actually predicted the end of the world, if they're just like, you know what, I think 5,000 years out, that's probably pretty good. We'll wait another 2 millennia before we worry about building the calendar on after this. But what's funny is ever since Jesus, everyone's been pointing to the Middle East. They all have. They all point to the Middle East as evidence as to why the end of the world is coming. And Solomon isn't so much concerned. And he's the writer of Ecclesiastes, which is the book we're in for this series. He's not so much concerned about the end of the world because he's an old man, and he's sitting at the end of his life, and he's going, one thing is certain about the end of the world and what you should do about it. And the one thing that is certain is that you probably won't see it because you'll probably die before then. He's like, it's 99% chance you'll die before then because it's 100% chance that you're going to die. And so basically the whole thing is that there's one certainty that is birth, and there's another certainty, death, and then a bunch of stuff happens in between. And so what we've been asking is what are you doing in between? Knowing that obviously you've been born, If you don't know that, we have a different sort of classes, a different sort of place where we can direct you other than the general crowd. If you're like, I wasn't born. I immaculately was conceived and just went poof. A stork brought me. I don't know, whatever it is. If you don't think you were born, we've got to deal with something else there. But the other certain thing is that we're all going to die. And Solomon's trying to make this clear as he's at the end of his life, looking at his very close and imminent death. He's trying to advise us young people, hey man, you're going to die. And the question that we must ask is, what are we living for? What are we doing in between birth and death? What is worthwhile doing in between birth and death? And there's something that I really like about Ecclesiastes. And so what we're going to discover next week and this transition that Solomon's about to be in, because if you've been here, it's just been what? Everything's meaningless. Everything's a waste of time. Don't bother partying. It gets lame. Don't bother having lots of women, lots of boyfriends, girlfriends. Doesn't matter. That's lame. Don't bother being successful. That's meaningless. And he just goes through, and everything's been meaningless. And he's about to tie it up right here. This is the end of it. And next week, it's like we're going to actually be able to sit down like he's a grandfather who's inviting us in to his house for a final supper, and he's going, you need to know these things. And so next week begins kind of a positive push towards, now that we know everything's meaningless, now that we've covered it all, here's what you need to know. And so this is the very end of this meaninglessness. And what I like is that Ecclesiastes is very holistic. What I've found in church is that we tend, and this just isn't church, but I get to see it in the church perspective. But we tend to get really extreme and to go to polarities, south, north, east, west, left, right, all the spectrums. We tend to just push into one direction. So in church, you will have a direction that says, you know what you really don't want to do in this life is you don't want to do sinful things. And so they'll create what we call legalism, and they'll say, what you need to do is not cuss and not drink and not watch rated R movies and not do any of this and any of that. And you just need to provide for your family and make sure they don't do it either. And then there's this whole other side that's a liberal side that says what you need to not do is what they do. What is that? Well, whatever they do. You just got to love people, man. Just live in the now and love people. And you just got to accept, and Jesus would accept. He'd just run around accepting everything. And that runs into its problems, because then you go, well, what part of Osama bin Laden would he accept? Would he accept 9/11? Because I do believe that he would accept a part of Osama bin Laden, but they end up getting themselves in this trap of total acceptance, no take a stand on anything, so wishy-washiness, and that's another form of church. And whatever it is, we move all the way to extremes. And what I really like about Ecclesiastes and what we're going to discover tonight is that what he says, work really hard and enjoy really hard. Now, you never hear that preached, do you? Enjoy really hard. Those words actually don't even go together. Like, it just sounds awkward saying it. Enjoy heartily. That sounds better, but that's with a T. That's not a D, I guess, so it doesn't work. But enjoy with all your might. Like, we just don't say things like that. And that's what I like about this. And what we're about to discover is that he's going to tell us, work really hard at life. Do your best to be a good person. Be wise. Don't be foolish, because that's even a bigger waste of time. Be wise, but don't be so wise that you don't enjoy life. And we have a tendency to do that in this polarity in church. Over here, it's all about enjoyment and freedom and lovey-doveyness. But they'd be happy to just sit around in their Fruit of the Looms watching hippie movies that always end happy. Indie films, right? And over here, they wouldn't be happy, but they would be somewhat okay with life if they just stuck their nose to the grindstone and just worked really hard till one day they woke up in the grave. Not waking up at all, of course, but being dead. They would be totally happy with that. And what I like about Solomon is he's going to say, no, you've got to have the both. You've got to live radically in the middle. And so his answer is, in all things, have peace. Have rest, have peace, have enjoyment. And I think that is one of the hardest commands, guys, that we have. And I think our generation, quite honestly, is a really lazy generation. I mean, I look at my own life, and I feel like I'm pretty lazy. I don't know if you guys feel that way, like, especially if you compare it to our grandparents' generation. Like, they just worked super hard, and they didn't feel entitled to anything, but they felt like anything that needed to be gained, you had to fight for it. You couldn't just be given it. You had to fight for everything, work hard for everything. And I feel like our generation, and especially the one coming up underneath us, is like, what are you going to give me? What are you going to give me? Like, the iPhone 4 is out, and we should just have it because it's out. It's there, man. 3GS, old news. Old news. You can't video chat on that. What's that? And then there's this sense that I deserve the newest thing. I deserve whatever it is. And I even feel that in myself, that we're lazy. But even still, even us as a lazy, entitled generation, I think as we get older and we get into careers and we have to start paying all of our own bills and mortgages and we start raising kids, it's going to be hard for us to get into the sense where we can just enjoy life and have peace. I want to remind you guys of a verse that Coulter covered last week. Who was here last week? Who heard Coulter? All right, he's not in here, but let's give him a round of applause because his friends are in here and they'll tell him that we love him. He got the Oscar for best new sermonizer. But he read a verse, and it's verse 1 of chapter 5, and he went over this, and it's simply, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. To come into the house of God and simply just sit down. And now the house of God isn't necessarily this building. It's not this church. It's just any time you set aside to intentionally open yourself up to God. To just do that and to just be open and to not show up to God and be like, okay, God, I got to read my 3 chapters before I can talk to you because I'll feel guilty if I don't read my 3 chapters because I signed a commitment at the church saying I would read these 3 chapters because it's on my path to read the Bible in 3 years. And on top of that, I got to make up for yesterday, so I'm going to read 6 chapters, and I'm going to show up, and then I'm going to tell you all the things I've done wrong so that I can feel better about it, and hopefully you won't strike me with a lightning bolt, and then I got to do all this, and there's this whole workup, and it's not any different than when they came to the temple in the old days, and they sacrificed bulls, and they sacrificed doves, and they had to do all their sacrifices before they could enter the presence of God. And Solomon's saying, you know what? It's actually better to just show up and go, my sacrifices aren't even worth it. I did forget yesterday. I don't even understand when I read, so what do you got for me, God? What do you got? And to just rest in the presence of God. I've been talking about this idea of just resting and being at peace before God with my team. And we've seen a lot of pastors and a lot of priests fall recently, right? Committing sins. Adultery is a popular one among pastors. I don't know. It's like their favorite. I don't know what it is. If it's like spin the wheel of sin and pick that one, and that's how you're going to go down. But adultery is like a favorite one of pastors, it seems like. And I was commenting to my team, to our Kaleo team, and I was saying, you know what's really funny is you take the 10 commandments, the things that we fight for to show up at City Hall with, and like, I will kill the atheist that doesn't let me put these out there. And like, they're so important, and we will like kill a liberal over these, right? That if any pastor breaks, do not murder, probably gonna get fired, right? I mean, that seems pretty obvious, actually. That didn't seem like a very tough one. Our senior pastor staff get together. We have an emergency meeting. Senior Pastor Kirk took a samurai sword to someone. The elder team is discerning and praying before God what we're going to do about it. We think we might put him on probation. Right? Everyone's like, no, fire the dudes, hand him over to the cops and send him to jail. I mean, I guess he could do video sermons from his jail cell. So, church, what you need to do, I don't know if you've ever been there, but you pick up the phone and talk through the monitor when you talk to people in jail. So I don't know if he's going to give sermons that way. If he commits adultery, obviously, like many pastors and ministers have been dismissed for that. If he gets caught stealing money from the church, they're going to fire the pastor. If it turns out that he's always lying and he can't be trusted, well, then how can you put the guy up here to speak? Because they can't be trusted. So we have this code, these 10 commandments, that if a pastor breaks these, you got to get rid of the guy, man. But there's one commandment that we are totally okay with our pastor breaking. And we're totally okay with our pastor breaking this one commandment because we're totally okay with breaking. We see all these commandments as a terrible sin should you violate them. Yet there's one that we're kind of like, God didn't mean that, really. He's just kidding around. He's just joking. That's more of a pat on the back. The other ones are a shake of the finger, but this one's like a, hey, pat on the back. And that one commandment is the obey the Sabbath. Obey the Sabbath. I find that interesting, that we will fire a pastor over any commandment. He comes in and says, the Lord is not one. There's actually many other gods, and they should be followed. We'll fire them. Any of those commandments, we will go, I can't follow this pastor. But if he breaks the fourth commandment and he doesn't Sabbath, we applaud him, actually, don't we? We applaud him in his sin. That guy's got a good work ethic. That's the American spirit of good industry right there, working hard, 9 to 5 in it, putting in the overtime. That's a good man. I think it's interesting. And yet Solomon tells us right here to draw near and just listen, and to not do, and to not perform, and to not try to be something, but to just be before God. That's the best. Solomon tells us that in his wisdom. And so I want to preface it with that idea of the Sabbath, because this is really what he's getting at in the first 8 verses of chapter 5. He's saying, just draw near and listen. Just shush. Zip the lips. Just be quiet before God. You can't say anything that's going to impress God. There's no poetry. There's no song. There's no anything that impresses God, because he has given the gift of creativity to all of us and goes, I knew you could do that. It doesn't impress him. So he's saying, sometimes just be quiet before God and listen. And I want to preface that, because now let's look at verse 8 and 9 in chapter 5. Because that's Solomon in his wisdom saying, be quiet. Well, what do we do? Verse 8 and 9. If you see in a province, in a state, in a region, in a country, whatever, the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, right? Because our tendency is to go, blah, right? And just freak out, form an awareness group, get a bunch of bracelets, sell them to everybody, t-shirts, right? We've never done that, of course. Our tendency is to go, do, make something happen, do it. Action man, gotta go. That's us. Freak out, go complain, write a letter to City Hall, write the manager, right? That's us, action. Solomon's going, no, don't be amazed when you see oppression. Don't freak out. Don't go nuts. And I don't think he's saying be okay with it. He's saying for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are higher ones over them, but this is gain for a land in every way. A king committed to cultivated fields. Right now, we are politically in just psychosis in America. I don't know what it is, man. Anything anyone says, I feel like our president or the leader of the GOP, it doesn't matter what side, could come out and be like, I like kittens. And somehow our country would find a way to be like, can you believe America's going down the poop chute? Can you believe it's happening? They like kittens. I'm a dog person. I pack heat for dogs, right? Like we're just in this really crazy freak out and be amazed at everything that happens. And Solomon's going, you know what's not good for a corrupt government? If they're corrupt, if they're good, if they're bad, if they're for the benefit of the people or for the benefit of their pocket, you know what's not good for a corrupt government? People who don't eat uncultivated foods, because it'll cause a revolt and they'll overthrow the person in charge. So you know what? Good or bad, you're probably going to get food on your plate. And I know we have examples, especially in Africa, where this doesn't happen, but there's an interesting, I didn't know this, but Spain, a European country, which I thought, when I think of Europe, I think oh yeah, they did away with kings and all that, except for the pompous ones that ride horses, and that's all they do. They don't have any power, but I thought they did away with powerful kings and tyrants a long time ago, but Spain had a dictator from the 30s all the way to the 70s of just last century, the 1900s. Just then, they had a guy who oppressed them and won a lot of titles for Real Madrid, who were the Yankees of the Spanish league, so you're welcome to hate them, not just because they play soccer, but just especially them. Just throwing that one out there. That has nothing to do with it. But he was a tyrant, and he killed anyone who wanted democracy. I didn't realize this. This is Western civilization. It happened in just very recently, just a few years before I was born. He was still in power. And what amazes me isn't even that, but even more amazing is the reaction of the people who hated him, who absolutely hated him, who were the ones who were the target of his oppression. What they say is, but you know what? No one was hungry under Franco. Isn't that amazing? They oppressed the very culture of some of these people he did. There's other languages in Spain other than Spanish, and he wouldn't let them speak it. If you spoke it, you would go to jail. He would take you to jail. First, he'd probably find you, then he'd take you to jail. And so the very being, their own language, who they are as a people, he oppressed, and yet they say, hey, but there wasn't a hungry mouth while he was in power. I find that interesting. Even in all that, there's like this piece of like, but you know what? We all ate, didn't we? We all ate. Food still made it to the table. See, I think we live, besides politically, we live economically in a culture where it's really just struggle, strive, go higher, go higher, go higher. And we call it the land of prosperity because we do live a much more prosperous life than the rest of the world, but sometimes I'm wondering at what cost. And I'll give you an example of our striving. I want a Tacoma, okay? I've confessed this sin of mine, this lust and greed of mine. I would like a Toyota Tacoma. I need something to legitimize my masculinity, number one. Number two, I own a house, and it would be nice to not have to go borrow my dad's truck or like put gravel into my trunk of my little Nissan Sentra. That's just weird. And I want a Tacoma. So my wife and I were trying to use financial wisdom in getting this Tacoma. And instead of going out and getting it on credit, we're doing the thing where we save a little bit at a time. Each paycheck, we put a little bit away into a separate account, a little bit away, until we have enough where we won't have to go into debt. This is our plan. Okay, so we're striving. We're like, okay, I think we can squeeze a little bit of extra money out so we can raise our standard just a little bit more, right? We can go from older car to newer older car because we're not going to buy a new one. We don't have the money. But we're going to do the newer older car. And so that's what we're doing. We're squeezing the money out. And so we're setting our goal, just the next step up. But what happens? As we find this extra money and we're able to put it aside, is it to our gain? No. Why? Because her car broke down this week. And so guess where all the money we've been saving is going? Into just getting that car running again. And on the way to pick her up from her car breaking down and her being in just some dirt lot with her broken down car, what happens to my car? I put the key in the ignition, and your little steering wheel lock that doesn't let you turn it on unless you wiggle the steering wheel a little bit. Yeah, you can full crank the steering wheel, and that sucker does not turn. So it's a perfectly working car if you can turn it on. So here we're trying to save and raise the standard and struggle, right, to climb a little bit more, and things break, and we're back to where we started. We're back to where we started. And even if, let's say, so even if I climb here and somehow we get more money and actually make money as a preacher or something, right? Something weird like that. Then what happens? Now we get to buy the Tacoma, right? Because, okay, so I get a raise. Now I get to buy the Tacoma. No, then we're going to have kids, little financial burdens running around. And they're going to have to eat. They have mouths that swallow money in the form of hot dogs and Easy Mac. And we're going to have to clothe them because their feet grow like a size every month. I remember I went through this period where my mom's like, I'm tired of buying you shoes every month, but your feet are growing at a ridiculous rate. How about I just buy you skis? And we call them your sandals for a while. And it's just the food, and they start eating a lot, and then when they're done eating and they're done growing, then it's college, and you got to pay for college, and And so you might be climbing the ladder, but suddenly what's going into them as an investment is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And with the kids come the minivan. So I wanted the Tacoma, but we got the minivan instead, right? We're going to wind up with the minivan. And in case I still have to legitimize my masculinity, we won't get a minivan. We'll get an SUV, right? Yeah. It's just in denial. It's minivan in denial. And on top of that, we're going to have house repairs. As we get the cars in order and fixed up, the house is going to break, and there's going to be a leak, or the door is going to get slammed by the kids, or they're going to throw plates one day. You're going to come home, and they're going to be like, look at this, Frisbee, and it breaks, and then you got to replace that. And then by the time you fix the house and you get the plates back in the cupboards, the minivan breaks down again, or you got to get new tires for it. And then pretty soon, when you were doing that, going out to get the new tires, you come home and your kid was climbing the tree, and now they broke their arm, and you got to go to the hospital. And all this time, you're trying to get a better life, but now you got to pay for a broken arm. And then the minivan's totally broke down, so you got to get a new car, a new minivan. And by the time you get them out to college and you've fed them and they're on their own, and then you want to return for your own education. Maybe my wife wants to go back so she can get her master's in teaching, or I want to get a master's in divinity. Doubt that's going to happen. I don't want to do that right now. And so it's just this life is this struggle. Get to the next step. You get a raise, but that goes into the next step, which is just an investment for the next step. And when you get to that next step, you're only one step closer to the one after it, which is only one step closer to the one that comes after that one, and on, and you hit 65, and you retire. And retirement's a funny thing, I think, in this culture. 65 was set by some guy, I don't know his name, it doesn't matter, neither do you guys. 120 years ago, he kind of set this. I think it was a sociologist. He set 65 is the retirement age back then, and it's been generally accepted since then. But the funny thing is life expectancy, when the retirement came in at 65, life expectancy was 47. So really death was the retirement. And 65 was just like, well, here's 3 years to not work. And that was the average life, like if anyone made it to retirement, I think it was like 7% of people made it to retirement or something. I can't remember the stat, but they're only expected of those who made it to 65 to be retired for 3 years before they died. But now we have this idea of retirement is you build up this plush, cush life that's going to happen. And now you work for almost as much time as you're retired for. Switch that. You're retired for almost as much time as you work for. So you work like 30 years, 30 to 40 years, and you're retired some 25 years now with life expectancy. And so life is about working so you can just sit around. So working, making money, striving, climbing the ladder, getting more stuff so you can get a boat for when you're retired, and you can get a Florida timeshare for when you're retired, and you can get a cabin for when you're retired, and you can get a bigger house so your grandkids can come over for when you're retired. And then you can do what? Buy new golf clubs for when you're retired and a membership at the golf club, right? And you can just sit around for the rest of your life and enjoy your things. You're like, look at all I did. Look at all I did. But here's what's interesting. Catch this. So people over 50, they account for more than 77% of a country's financial assets, of our countries. So catch that. 77% of the money is in the population of those over 50. So it sounds like they made it. All this work, all this striving, they got to a point where they've got the money, they've got the life, right? No. The interesting thing is that said, with all the money in the retirement age people, the number of older Americans participating in the workforce has been rising over the last 15 years. Now, I don't know if it's just boredom. It could be boredom. But this next stat, MSNBC reported this, that last one. This next stat, I think, gives an answer. So more people over the last 15 years, it keeps increasing how many more people of retirement age are going back to work. So it's either boredom or they can't sustain their life. They can't sustain the standard of living that they made for themselves, so they have to go back so they can make more money to enjoy the things that they made all the money to enjoy in the first place. You catching me? So of those who go back to work after retirement, often have higher incomes than those who retire completely. Researchers found, though